Hello folks, in this video I intend to give you a pretty thorough introduction to how to use Jekyll, and we'll be looking particularly at an example project, and we'll be looking at this wireframe here where we've got a concept for building out a site for Dr. Nick Pitt's the daily briefing that's currently an email system. He sends out a daily news email, and we're building a website for him. So we're going to use Jekyll as just an example for this. And the main page, which you can see here, is basically going to have the site's name, and we're actually going to move all of this down like up to about here, because we're going to have actually kind of a jumbotron that we can really feature the subscription. So we really want to drive users to subscribe to the email. And then we'll have the about information over in a sidebar. But then what's going to kind of occupy the middle area in good kind of blog-like fashion is a bunch of tiles like these that will have links to the actual sort of daily entries. So the idea is that kind of like a blog, he's going to have a daily entry showing all of the content. So just to give you a sense of what one of those looks like, they come in email form and they're nicely formatted, but before he puts them in to a MailChimp to send them out, he builds them in a Word file looking something like this. So this is a great starting point to transition over and build it out in Markdown, and then let Markdown and the Jekyll system actually build a site. So we're going to look at all of those different pieces. Specifically, let's get started with Jekyll. So Jekyll is basically a Markdown-based build system that builds a static site, but it gives you all kinds of flexible controls and some really nice features that make it nice for kind of a next step for people who are looking to do more with websites and do some automation. Especially thinking about a blog type site or something like that that has serial content, where you're going to be adding new content over time, and every time you add a new item, if you're doing it, kind of the old-fashioned manual way, you've got to add a new page that has that new blog content, and then you've got to go to your home page or wherever you have that article appearing and link it in, and there's all kinds of pieces that you can forget about, or there's a lot of duplicate work, and a build system like Jekyll really can simplify that. So let's get it going, get the installation running, and we'll talk about some of the features once we do. Right here on the page are literally the 4 steps that it takes to get this installed on your computer and running. But I like to go to see the quick start guide over here under Docs, where each of those steps is just explained a little bit more. So the first thing you want to do is in a terminal, you're going to want to have browsed to the folder in which you want to create a new Jekyll site. So I'm going to make sure that I'm in my sites sandbox directory. Good, and this is where I can now create my new site. So I'm going to skip the first step, gem install Jekyll bundler. But that is definitely a step that you want to complete so that you get the whole Jekyll package. And you might also want to do that using sudo. Sudo gem install Jekyll bundler, then it should ask you for your password, and then you can make sure that that Jekyll is installed globally. If you're not sure whether you've got Jekyll installed or not, you can do Jekyll version, and that should tell you which version of Jekyll you have. You can see I have 3.5.2. So now I can run Jekyll new, and then type in the name of the site that I want to create. So this is going to be in my, right now, remember that I had gone to my sites folder and my sandbox folder. Oh, actually I want to be in my W3 pers folder here, so I'm going to back out and get that right. CD, ls, okay, CD, W3. Okay, now I can run Jekyll new. And I want to create one for the daily briefing. What's going to happen is in the folder that I'm in right now, this W3 PRs folder, it's going to create whatever I enter here. So I'm going to say daily-briefing. I always misspell briefing. Let's get this right. Don't have spell checker in the terminal here. All right, so new daily briefing. So there, I've run that, and now it's going to install and you can see that it's actually running. So that's going to run for a little bit, and when it's all done, I should see all green and happiness, and then I'm here. So let's see what this page here told us to do next. And by the way, you can see in Finder the new folder that was created, and some stuff has been put in there for me. That's nice. Okay, so back over here you can see the next step it's saying is to change directory so that you are moving into your new folder. So cd daily briefing. All right, now I'm here and I can run this command here, bundle exec Jekyll serve. So watch what happens. Bundle exec Jekyll serve. All right, so now what's happening is that, and you might have seen here that this little site folder was created when I ran that. So before we had everything except site, and so now what's happening is Jekyll is watching this folder right here, and it is going to, anytime we make any changes, it's going to rebuild my website and create the built website in this underscore site folder. Okay, so what you're seeing here is any of the pages that needed to be built according to whatever configuration was going on out here. So therefore, you can actually pull this up from the web address that they give you. By the way, 127.0.0.1 is actually also called localhost. So I can paste that in, and I'm looking at my Jekyll site. I can also just change this to localhost 4000, and I'm at the very same place. Okay, so those of you who learned about browser sync in the last series of lessons that we did might also want to have browser sync running. So if you want to do browser sync, what you actually want to do is change directory into the site folder and run browser sync out of this file. So we might do browser sync start sf, then glob, looking for any changes to any files. And pretty soon this will open up, and here we have actually our browser sync site going. So you can see that this Jekyll site comes with some default styles, which we're going to replace with some Bootstrap boot swatch styles, and we'll walk through how to do that. But let's talk a little bit more about how this site is actually being put together. So we ran through this a little bit, and there's more here that you can read to get things going, but we're going to skip now down to the directory structure so we can talk about some of the things that are going on. So notice the folders and files that they have demonstrated here, and which of those we actually have in our site right now. Actually, let me get Adam going here. Open project folder. And we're going to go to our Web3 projects, to the daily briefing, and open that up. Okay, so daily briefing is here, and let's compare what I have against what. It's not letting me move that up there, is it? There we go. We have a posts folder, which they show here, and we have a site folder, which they have mentioned here. And so then we have this config.yaml file, which is here, and then there's a they're showing a Jekyll metadata, which we don't have, and then an index.md, and they can say that this index.html could also be index.md. Okay, so we've got some different files and folders. There's a couple of extra folders here that we can figure out what to do with, but let's kind of talk through the gist here. So let's start in index.md. Notice that when I open this, there's really nothing in here. And nonetheless, my site has an index.html file that's generated, and it has lots of stuff in it. So how does Jekyll know where to get all this stuff and how to build this out? Well, it starts at a file like index.md, and at the top of this file is something called front matter, which is something we can do in Jekyll, in any MD file in Jekyll. It starts with, starts with 3 dashes, and then we put inside of those 3 dashes some of the config variables, and we can even define our own variables. So I'm going to pull this little bit of front matter out. That's just a little bit of information for people getting started. But notice that this one says layout colon home. What does that mean? What that means is it's going to look for the home layout and make use of that layout. Well, where is that layout? We actually don't have it in this site. It's actually pulling from some of the Jekyll defaults. So let's look at how we would create that if we wanted to. Notice that one of the folders here is underscore layouts. So if I create a new folder, underscore layouts, and I put in this a new file called home.html, this file is now going to be used as the template. And all I need to do in here is put the content variable in place. So notice that when I do that, my homepage should change pretty drastically. See, there's nothing there now. So I basically replaced all of that default stuff that was coming from the default kind of global Jekyll information with my own template, and that is the home template. So you know what, I think I want to have a little bit more of a broader name for this, so I'm going to change this to default, and that's following a convention that you can see here where there's one called default. And the idea here is that this could be kind of my most broad catch-all kind of template for or layout for files in my site. But notice that if I come outside of this front matter and I add some markdown content such as you know, an H1, the daily briefing, and then I put my little tagline in there, biblical insight on today's news. All right, so, and I save. Now Jekyll has rebuilt right away in the background, and browser sync has should be refreshing. And look at that. There's still some defaults coming in here now that we've refreshed, but we'll talk more about those in just a second. You can see though that my that happened, by the way. I know why that happened. I'm sorry, I'm going too fast. We changed the name of the layout from home.html, or from home to default. Notice if I change it back to home, it's now using our blank template, and we're getting the unstyled version here. But notice this time it's doing the processing of this markdown content, and what we're getting is actual nice formatted HTML content. All right, yay for that. All right, so that is very nice. That's a little demonstration of one of the main cool things about this, is that it makes use of Markdown, which is a super easy way to add really simple HTML content. But back to the point here. I had changed this to default, and when I did, we went back into the zone where our version over here was using some of those default templates. Well, all I need to do is go back and rename home.html to be default.html. And now, because that's blank, we get the unstyled version. Okay, so this is all well and good, but how do we get some more advanced stuff going on? Well, really, all we need to do is start putting in our standard body, document structure. So I'm going to use the Bootstrap's recommended document structure, if I can get it here. Go way up to the top. It's the downside of Bootstrap. So on the Getting Started page, they give me some, starter markup and stuff to go with. So here's some of that. So I'm going to grab this much, paste it in, grab my title, paste it in, and then the end of head and body would logically come next. Oops. All right, so then we're going to close off body, close off HTML, and there's actually a little bit more we want to put into our setup here so that we get all the good Bootstrap stuff. So first we need the jQuery library itself, and then back up the top here we have some CDN stuff we can use for the other actual Bootstrap JavaScript stuff. Okay, so we put that in, and I'm going to indent my content a little bit. Now for the actual style sheet, I don't want to use the default Bootstrap style sheet. I want to use this theme from Bootswatch. So I'm going to go to my bootstrap .css file that they give me. I'm going to copy that, or actually I can just copy this URL here and then put that into a link type of text HCSS and rel of style sheet and href pointing to that file. Okay, so now I've kind of got a little bit more going on in my template. So I should actually see now my Bootstrap styles coming in, and that's looking much better. Okay, so this is the idea of a template. You can set up the frame around which your content is going to be brought in, and you can do even fancier things than this. So I like that. That's my default frame, but we can get a little bit better. Imagine that we wanted to actually have several pages that use this. We can actually separate these pieces out into separate little files called includes, such as header and footer, and then we can easily bring them in. So all we need to do is create an includes folder, and then in includes we can create little pieces like header.html, and we can bring all of this stuff into there. Okay, and then we can bring our footer into footer.html. Okay, so now that we have those partials, we need to know how we can actually bring those partials into our, or those includes into our site. So I'm going to jump quickly down here to customization, and you can see here how they're showing how to do the includes. So you basically do a %, include, and then the include file that you want to stick in there. So basically back here in default, because I've separated these files out, I should now be able to do include header.html and include footer.html. And all of that stuff should still be coming in. Oops, footer.html, yep. Oh, I put footer in the layouts instead of includes. Okay, so now footer and header are in there, and we're looking great. So let's actually put some footer content in, just so we have that to test. Okay, and so there's my footer popping in there, and the masthead, we could do the same thing. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I want to put that registration. No, I'm happy with the header here. Okay, so you've seen a little bit about how we can start to do our own custom kind of page templates, and we have this very, very simple one here called default.html. Okay, and we told our home page to follow that. So it's using, it's implementing that, and what's happening then is when Jekyll is running, it's going to look for any of the files in here that have a .md extension and that do not have an underscore in front of them. Underscored files are going to be ignored. And it's going to take that file and look at it and figure out what layout to implement. It's going to go find that layout from the layouts folder, and it's going to discover when it gets here that, oh, there are some includes. So Jekyll is going to go and grab that include and drop it in. And then it's got the actual content, so it's going to go back to my index.md, and it's going to say, all right, now we'll grab that actual content here, and we will paste it in where the content placeholder is. And next it finds an include, so it goes and finds the footer folder and brings that content over. So you see how it's pretty cool. It's kind of dynamically pulling all of those pieces together, and that means it's very easy for us to create pages and not have to make manually put all of that goop into every page. So for example, they have this about page here, just to kind of prove the idea. I can go in here and put in the about blurb, just to again make the point of how nice Markdown is. And so there's supposed to be a paragraph break there at the Dr. Nick Pitts, and then there's a little caption here. And then we can put an image in. All right, so now we ought to be able to go to about.html. And if the page had compiled correctly, we would be seeing that content. So I was incorrect. It's actually in an about folder and then index.html. Okay, so what if we wanted to change that? What if we wanted it to just be about.html in the root folder? Well, that is configured here in the front matter that is here in about.html. Notice that it's said what layout should it use? Oh, the page layout. Well, we don't want that. We want it to use our default layout. So that's going to switch to our default layout. And then here the title is about, but it says permalink is in /about/. And that's how we're getting this idea of it going into the subfolder there. So notice that if I pull this out, the page we're on no longer exists. In the site folder, you can see that about folder was deleted. So the Jekyll system was smart, realized that we deleted that idea of the permalink. And so now we can find about right in the root directory in about.html. But let's say we wanted to add another page to the site. Say we wanted to create one called like resources or something like that. Say Dr. Pitts wants to have a bunch of other kind of miscellaneous resources that he'll add to. Well, I just go to my root folder and I create a file called resources.md. Okay. Now notice that the browser refreshed. That's because it recognized that some files changed. Well, what changed? Sure enough, right away inside of the site folder, the file has already compiled into a resources file. Now, the funny thing is it's not the HTML extension yet, probably because we haven't configured it fully. So we want to tell it which layout to get, the default layout. And then we can put a heading in here, resources. And then we can say resources coming soon. Okay, so notice that now that it's fully correct, Jekyll figured out what we wanted, created a resources.html file, and now we have that file in our build site here. Resources coming soon. Okay, so we've looked at how to create layouts and make use of includes. We've talked about how to create pages in the root folder here and kind of link them in to one of those layouts. But now that we have that default layout, let's imagine that we want to do something a little different on our home page. Let's say that we wanted to have a different layout there, kind of like what we started with, a separate home one. So I'm going to change this to home, and I'm going to go into my layouts folder and create a new file called home.html. So this is a new page template. Oops. So I'm going to go back to home so that I'm actually looking at my work along the way. Okay, and so index.md is looking for the home template, and right now home template doesn't have anything in it. So one of the cool things about layouts is that we can actually tell them to implement another layout. So we could say, why don't you start with default? So it's going to go to the default layout, and it's going to bring in all of that default stuff for me already. But I want to make sure that I actually have content here in this, otherwise we don't get any content. So right now it's kind of weird in that it's this template is pointing to this template, which is getting the header and outputting the content and whatnot. So the key to note here is that since this one is pointing to this one, the content that gets injected here is going to be whatever we put in here. So notice that if I go in here and I say put into it an H1, the daily briefing, home, feed of articles goes here. Okay, so notice that what happened is that the home page still has the daily briefing in it and biblical insight on today's news. So that's this heading here that's appearing, and biblical insight on today's news, right? But home.html, I actually tried to use Markdown, and I'm actually in an HTML file here. So if I wanted to do that, I really need to do normal HTML. So if I do that, okay. So see how that's what's coming in, and then it says feed of articles goes here, and then the content blurb. So this content is coming from index.md because index.md is implementing home. Okay, so that's the content that gets injected here. But because this is implementing default, it's going to be wrapped by this and injected in here. So I know it's kind of complicated, but it's just nice to know that you can actually have a page layout that is dependent on other page layouts. But you might like even better to just make home look a lot like the default, but just have some extra stuff in it like this. Okay, so we took away the idea of home depending on default. Home is now completely independent from default, but it is still using making use of those same the same includes that the default was. So we did this because we might actually want to put here a Jumbotron that has our registration stuff in it. Okay, and so I'm actually going to shift a little bit, and I don't want to have this H1 and stuff in my home page anymore. In fact, what I actually want to do is move this about content over to home page and delete that about page. So it's going to be about. We've got that stuff there. Okay, so you see that content came in, and we wanted to delete about.md. Okay, and that deleted the corresponding HTML file in our site. Okay, so where am I going with this? All right, well, I inserted this Jumbotron, and I didn't do all the right classes. So let's go look at what gives us a Jumbotron from the documentation here. So that says that needs to be div class Jumbotron, and we put an H1 and some paragraphs inside of it. So div class Jumbotron, there we go. H1, biblical insights on today's news. And then we're maybe going to put a form. Sign up to receive our daily newsletter. And then we're going to put an input here. So this is Bootstrap stuff. Okay, so see how that was all brought into our page, and it's looking pretty slick. Let's get all those nice default styles from Bootstrap, but Bootstrap actually needs a little bit more, and that's something we're going to need to put in here. We're going to want to go class, container, and then that's going to bring everything in a little bit, which makes it responsive and nice like that. Okay, so back on home, we've got this kind of default blurb in here, and then we're going to put the feed of articles here. So I'm going to open a new row and close that row. And then I'm going to have a left column. And I always need to go to Bootstrap. I use so many of these systems, I forget what all the correct classes are. So if I want to do a 3/4 left container, I'm going to want to do call MD9. So call MD9. Okay, and that's where the feed of articles will go. And then over here on this side, for the remaining 3/4, we'll paste our content in. So this is where that about content should appear. Good, so we've got space created here thanks to the div and the Bootstrap formatting, and then our about is ready to go trailing down the side there. And I see that my image, oh right, the exclamation point goes outside there. Okay, there it is. Okay, so we've got a good bit of things in place now. So some of this has been just getting Bootstrap going, but hopefully you've seen a good bit of how we can use these includes and partials, or includes and the layouts to create some different setups here. Okay, but let's talk about some of the other power of the build system that is employed here. And that comes from looking at one of these other default folders. That is the posts folder. So take a look in here and you'll find that we have this kind of default starter file where they've put in an example blog post. So we want to actually replace this with some of our own the actual daily briefing in the long run. But before we go there, let's figure out what's actually happening to this when the site is compiled. Notice that it's given the post layout, so we might want to change that to default, so it gets one of our actual layouts. It's given a title, Welcome to Jekyll. It's given a date, and then it's put in the categories of Jekyll and update. So let's look at what happens when this is generated. Notice that we don't get a post right here in the folder, but we do have a Jekyll folder. Well, that's because one of the categories that we put it in fact, the first category we put it in was called Jekyll. So when we open that up, notice that there's another folder here that corresponds to the second category we put it in, called Update. And then there's a 2017 folder, which must be coming from the date, and then a 9 folder, and then a 23 folder, and finally, we have a file here that is that's named similarly to the actual title that we put in here. And if we pull up that page, notice that it's getting all of this template stuff, and then there is our actual content. You'll find this in your posts directory, etc. Okay, so basically Jekyll got really smart, and all we needed to do was put this one little file in here. Notice that it's named by the date it was created, like we actually manually named it that and gave it a title. But exactly where it was compiled to came from what we put in here. So maybe it's too complex. Maybe we don't want all these categories. So I pull those out and save. Notice that that whole structure gets changed so that now there's just the date-like structure for each of these. So that's pretty cool. Let's change it to be the date for our sample, which was the 19th. And it's just going to be daily briefing. All right. So notice that just changing the name of the file didn't actually change what compiled down here, but when we come in and actually change the name of this variable here, then we do get that difference. Let's say that we posted it at 07 a.m. Nick is usually up pretty early in the morning getting these out. Okay, so now that actually did update, and we get dailybriefing.html right down in there. Okay, so if we wanted to do another one, all we need to do is create a new file and give it a name however we'd like. You can really name these any way you want, but it's going to affect how they're sorted in the folder. So let's just assume that we've got another daily briefing for the next day, and we're going to have similar front matter at the top of this, but it's now going to be for the 20th. And then I'll just put that in just to give the example. Okay, so look at in the compiled folder, we now have a 20 file, and there is the compiled version of what we just created. Okay, so you can see some of the power that of this build system, that just as we're working, it's recreating all the folder structures here in our built file. It's very nice. Now, how do we get all of these actually linked in from one of our pages? We could certainly go into our index.html file, because we know that there happens to be, actually we would want to go into our layout, our home layout here, where we had the feed of the articles. And maybe we're going to have, oh, actually I would normally do that as a list, but I'm following this Bootstrap structure, so I'm going to go to Bootstrap Components and use the thumbnails structure that they prescribe here. Okay, so inside of my row, inside of my other column here, I'm going to do another row. Okay. And there's not necessarily going to be a thumbnail image, so I'm going to pull that image out. But there's they've got this caption here. I don't even know if I need the caption. I'm going to pull that out now. I think that the div and some paragraphs is about all that I need. Okay, so we can go and look and see, okay, there is the content that I got. Well, so I could put the direct link to my file. I could go 2017-09-19-daily briefing.html. But boy, isn't this kind of getting into what we don't want to be doing? Kind of manually populating that URL. That's exactly right. We don't want to be doing that. But just to kind of see what we could, what we're going to want to have is this kind of a structure. We're going to have the little list where at the top of his daily briefings are these cute little kind of couple of questions that kind of lead you into the articles and things that he's got for you today. So I'm just kind of simulating them so you can see where we're going. Okay, so we put all that content in here manually, and what we'd really like for this to do is to automatically come from the article itself, so that we don't have to populate all this content, so that it can really be something that's coming from the actual article. So let me draw your attention to the documentation here on working with posts. And let's find the place where they show us how to, here we go. To display an index of posts, we're going to do something like this, where, so in the template file, that's where we're working, we're going to have this little bit of stuff that says for post in site.posts, and it's going to wrap around the thing that we want to repeat. So we're going to put it right here, and then we're going to end for after the thing that we need to repeat. Okay, so we've got this row that wraps around, and then this div here is going to repeat for as many posts as we have. Okay, so with just that done, notice now that we have two, because we have a second post in our folder over here. So if I go in and add a third, oh man, and we get some of that good front matter going. So this is day 3. This is day 2. And this is day 1. All right, we've got 3 little pieces here because we have 3 posts. So now how do we get some of the actual content from these posts in? Well, we have access to these front matter variables by calling them like this. We can call post.title. And look how now we've got day 1, 2, and 3. And it's putting them in reverse chronological order. That's kind of the default setup because that's kind of a normal blog-like setup, right? To kind of put them in reverse order. So that's pretty cool. Now, what if we wanted each of these to actually point to the correct page? Well, back over here in the setup, you can see we can call post.url. And so we would put that here where we had the URL, post.url. And it's rebuilt, and look how it's actually pointing to each file. We click on it, and we actually go nicely to that very post. All right, so there's still some formatting to do, but boy, we've done a lot thanks to the build system here in Jekyll, and a lot of the formatting, of course, is coming from the nice styles coming from Bootstrap. All right, so you've seen some of the power here of how we can create the partials that get built in, or so the includes that get built into kind of create these dynamic layouts. How the site is kind of rebuilding all the time based on the real simple files that we're creating. And then now we've seen some of the power of the serial content, where because we're putting files into this posts folder, those are being recognized by the Jekyll system as being part of the site.posts list. So we can iterate through and automatically create sets of posts and information about them here. So let's push a little bit forward in that some of this content here is something that we might actually like to have coming from the article itself, right? So this is something else that we would need to put into front matter, and in the long run we'd want to do something like this, post.preamble or something like that. All right, so we'd need to then create that over here in our file like this, preamble, and we could say hello world, and you'll see that would come in through here on this day 1 file. Excuse me. Okay, so we don't have any in the others, so let's go put them in just to make sure that that's coming through. Okay, so hello world, hello world, hello world. But we actually wanted to have this nice little formatted list of things. So if we actually want this to be multi-line, what we need to do is start it with a pipe and then give ourselves some space, and we need to make sure that we always tab in or enter 2 spaces here at least. Okay, so then we can paste in the list content that we want to have, and we just need to format it using Markdown. So we can say worst congressional campaign ever, and boy, look how much faster this is than all the markup that I put in manually a moment ago, huh? And then happy talk like a pirate day, we want to be italicized. Arr. And then he actually had a hyperlink here. So hyperlink, copy hyperlink. When we want to do hyperlinks in Markdown, we just do brackets around the anchor, and then in parentheses we paste in the hyperlink that we want. Okay, so look, that content is coming in, but it looks kind of ugly. So let me draw your attention to something else here in the Jekyll documentation, and that is templates. So these are not templates as in the way that I've been using templates so far in our discussion. This is a way that we can take when we're putting in these little curly braces variables in our actual layouts, like what we did here. We can basically pass them through a filter that will transform them in some way. And one of the options we have is this one down here, Markdownify, and that converts a Markdown formatted string into HTML. That's exactly what we want. So we're going to go here after preamble and pipe in Markdownify. So that should take this Markdown formatted content and convert it into HTML content, and that's actually what it did. So that's a fantastic way to get some of this preamble content in the article itself here into our page. So what remains is then to actually put the rest of the article into Markdown and format it. I'm going to bring a little bit of it in and do a little bit of formatting just to let you see how this goes and how fast it is thanks to Markdown. So first of all, we have a quote here that we can format like this, because that's now this is I'm just putting it in italics for now, but we'll come back and do something better with it in a moment. All right, so now this is one of our headings, so we're going to make it an H2, and it's number 9, exclusive U.S. government wiretapped former Trump chairman. Whoa, boy. And then this is actually made up of a lot of quotes, so we're going to put those in quotation blocks. Okay, and then Nick has his Nick note that comes next, so I'm going to put a little bold around Nick note, and it goes from there. All right, next we have another heading 2, and then some quotes. From the actual article, and the Nick note. Boy, you can see that comes together pretty quickly, doesn't it? All right, so let's go take a look at what that looks like in the page. See the nice formatting that we're getting? Pretty slick. Pretty slick. All right, so we could go through and format much more in the whole document. We might actually find that we don't want those paragraph breaks. That should pull things together there. Oops, that was 8. Let's do 9 here. Yep, I actually made it one big long thing, which is a bother, but we can talk more about how to fix that later if you care. But anyway, the formatting, thanks to Markdown, is very slick. But let's talk about how to kind of add a template around this page. Well, it's pretty simple, right? We just go and make sure that the default template is implemented. But maybe what we actually need then is to put more into our default template. So notice that home, we did this Jumbotron where we had the great big news heading, but maybe on a default page we'll just have this little bit of front matter here, like that. And so rather than the Jumbotron, we're just going to have a header. Okay, so it's going to get some bootstrap styles perhaps, but now there's just a little bit more there. So we could definitely push more with styles, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But now you've seen how we can make use of the posts and using the layout here, how we can do this dynamic thing where for each of the posts in the post directory we get this little loop going that's creating tiles for each of our things. So you can actually do this with anything you'd like. And they're called collections. Let me demonstrate that really quickly. Let's say that he's going to add some other thing like biographies for some other authors. Maybe he's got some other people that are going to contribute. The way we work with collections, let me point out that they are described in the documentation here. There is a collections item here, so you can look at this, but I'll give you the short version. The new folder here is going to start with an underscore. That tells Jekyll to ignore this folder for normal building, and so let's call it authors. All right, so inside of authors, maybe we're going to have one called Pitts Nick.md. Okay, so front matter can certainly help, but so maybe we would actually put Nick's bio in here, which I have in that about. So let me just grab that real fast just to have some content. Okay, so there's the actual content, but now we could put some front matter in here, the name is J. Nick Pitts, and we could say title, founder of Daily Briefing. Okay, so that is now an entry in our authors category, but we could also do another one. Let's say Shanley. Fill as if I had anything to add to this. Name, Phil Shanley, title, webmaster. Okay, and then the content here is just going to be something fun like Phil builds websites. He reads the daily briefing. Okay. All right, point made. I've created this idea of, so I've actually got data in my collection now, in theory. Oops, I need to correct that file name. Okay, so notice that I created these files, but they're not, landing in the site in any meaningful way. In order to get that to happen, I need to actually tell Jekyll about this collection, which I do by going to the config and adding somewhere here in the above those build settings, collections, and then a new line, and I'm going to create one called authors. So this needs to match the folder name, but excluding that underscore at the beginning. And then I want to do this, output true. Okay, so when I turn that on, what's going to happen once I restart the Jekyll build, when you change the config file, you have to restart the Jekyll build process. You'll see a difference there once we do that. So we've got browser sync still going, but we're going to Control C to stop the build process, and then we're going to just run it again. Notice that it created this authors folder, and we now have a nickpitts.html and shanleyphil.html. Okay, so Jekyll now knows about that collection and will now know to watch it to rebuild the file. So one thing I could do is go into these and declare which layout they should use so that we actually have some formatting around them. I forgot that piece. So layout, let's go default. And we can do the same thing in Shanley-Phil. So notice that I kind of named this whatever. I could put age in here. 33 for goodness sakes. And Nick Pitts, boy, he's a youngin'. How old is that guy? I don't even know. Unknown. Okay, so I've just named that variable. I just created my own variable here, and that's something we'll be able to make use of. So now I've got those files compiling, and if I go to one of them manually, if I go to authors and then Phil, Shanley-Phil, that is, phil.html, there is the content that was on my page, but none of that front matter is coming in. So if I want that front matter to come in, perhaps I need to create actually a new page layout for authors. So I would go to layouts and I would go new file and I would go authors.html, and then maybe I want it to do the same thing as header or as default. So the best thing would actually be to do that by telling it to inherit from the default layout. So implement the default layout. Okay, and then we're going to need the content to come into the page here. So now we need to tell those pages to use the author's layout. Okay, so Phil Shanley should now be using the author's layout, and I can now have a little bit more fun in authors.html. Perhaps I want to say in an H2, put the name. And I think actually I need to go page.name. Okay, so page.name, page is kind of the parent that's going to contain all of the data coming from my front matter here. So the name property is what was brought in there. Then I could go small, and I could go page dot title. And there we get webmaster. So content came in, but maybe we also want to go I page.age. Okay, so you can see we've got that content coming in thanks to the variables we put in the front matter, and then of course the catch-all content is coming in there too. Now, similar to what we did with posts, maybe we want to link to each of these authors on the main page. So, in place of Dr. Pitt's stuff over here, maybe what we actually want to do is pull that out so that that's not actually part of the the page content, and instead go to our page template in the layouts, home, and after that about content that is coming in here, maybe we want to add another little heading, H3 authors, and start a list where we can do something very much like we did with the posts, except now instead of calling site.posts, we can say for author in site.authors. And what we'll do is actually create an item. And so we should see 2 items down there. There they are, but they're not getting any content in them because we didn't put any content in them. So we might go author.name and author.title. Cool. So that's coming from that automated data. Now, all the better if we want to actually link to their bios. We can go href author.url and then end that hyperlink. I must have made a mistake. Yep. There we go. Right, and we're pointing right to that author's page. So the posts feature is built in because the Jekyll builders assumed that you would want to do like blog posts. But what they also left available is the option for you to create your own collections, like what we did here. So we created the authors folder, put the data into it, then we updated the config to say that we have this collection and we want it to output, and then we just had to restart the build and we're good to go. You can also make use of SAS in this. And other kinds of assets. So we mentioned early on that if you place folders in here that have underscores, they're going to be ignored. But if you place a folder here that does not have underscores, like images, that is going to be automatically compiled and included in to your site folder over here. So you just need some content in it. I'll just add an HTML file here to just make the point. So now when I save, this should be compiling into my site folder, and there it is. So that's how you can make use of images. But styles are something else we can do. All we need to do is create a SAS file here in the root directory, such as styles.scss. And we can put some styles in there, and notice that it's already recognizing it and compiling it. So now we just need to make sure that we link that into one of our files. So maybe this is going to be like some override styles here. So we might just kind of put a link type rel. Oops. Oh my. And we're just going to want to point to the styles.css file, which will be in the compiled folder eventually. We've got another little fix to make before that will work, but that should do it for us. Now, because this could be in any level of directory, we also want to do an absolute or a site relative path by putting that / here to make sure that we always start at the root directory looking for styles.css. Okay, so that's how we've linked it in. In order to really get it working, there's one little funny other little thing here that we need to do, and that's just to put a front matter block at the top, and even if it's just empty. Okay, so now you can see that's working. We've got that red border. If I change it to green, it's automatically compiled and browser sync refreshes, and we're good to go. If you want to have partials, it's recommended that you actually create a new SAS folder and you make it underscored so that it's ignored, and then you could put a new file in there called vars.scss, and then you can import it just like you would other things. Import vars, and it's actually going to be pretty smart. Notice that I didn't even put the SAS directory up front because Jekyll is configured to look for that SAS directory and find it. Okay, so I could now make use of that variable. theory. It helps to spell everything right, so we want vars, and we do not need front matter at the top of this page, and we can just do anything else we'd like here. You can see if I change it to green, it gets refreshed and changed to green. So we just import it as a string, but we do not need the SAS folder prepended, and we also do not need the underscore prepended or the extension. Jekyll knows that when we import, it's going to default to look in the SAS folder for something that begins with an underscore followed by this name here. All right, one other thing that we do want to make sure to account for is how to get this project onto a GitHub repo. So the process is going to be a little bit backwards from what we might have done in the past, where we started at GitHub, created a repo, and then cloned it locally. We're going to kind of work the other way around, where we're going to use an existing folder on our computer as a new repo. So I'm going to go File, New Repo, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in my root, the folder outside of the repo. So there is the repo that I want to add daily briefing. So I want to make sure I'm in the next folder up, and then I'm going to just provide the name, and I want to make sure that I match the folder. So GitHub Desktop is going to look for this folder or create one. So if I don't match the name of my folder exactly, it's going to end up creating another folder that I don't want. So daily briefing, and then we create repository. So notice that when we've done that, look at all the files are recognized and an initial commit is made. So we're ready to go. And just to make sure, I'm going to just go in here to this other file, type in test and save it, and just make sure that the changes come through. Yes, indeed, it is tracking it. So I now can just remove that. Okay, so now we want to push this to an actual GitHub repository. So we do have the option to publish this repo to GitHub. When we click on that, notice that we're going to have the option now to essentially create a repo from our desktop like this. So I'm going to just update this a little bit so that I have Daily Briefing Demo. I might have another separate project for what I'm going to do in Daily Briefing, and this was just a demo, but I wanted to show it actually pushing up. You can choose to see if you're in any organizations you want to publish to, and we do not want to keep this code private because that requires you to have an upgraded account, and then we're ready to go. So you can provide a description if you'd like, but that's enough for me. I'll publish my repo, and in here just in a little bit you can see the progress is running up there, and now it has been pushed up to GitHub. So I can refresh up here on GitHub, and you can see Daily Briefing Demo has indeed been uploaded, and all of my files are here. So like we have done in the past, what you're going to want to make sure to do is to go over and create a develop branch and switch to that develop branch to do your work. And then as you make progress on this, you're going to want to do a pull request in order to get my feedback and start that review cycle. So that's a quick word about GitHub, and I'll wish you good luck on your project.